What do you envision when you think about a humble person? Do you envision them being quiet, reserved to themselves, or do you picture them being confident and bold? Today, we're going to be unpacking the mindset of humility. We're going to be discussing the purpose, the process, and the promise of humility. Before we even get into that, as my husband would say, let's lay the foundation before we get into those three processes.
Nice and thick.
Nice and thick. The Hebrew word for humility means modesty and selflessness. Another meaning for the word humble is to occupy your God-given space in this world.
That's good.
When I saw that definition, I did not know that humility was linked to occupying your God-given space in this world.
You know, it's so interesting because in the New Testament, Jesus says to occupy until I come. And the way that occupy is translated is to do business until I come. So it's almost like the most humble people are the ones who are doing business in their space. And really owning that space, who are the most humble.
Whatever that space is.
Yeah.
That's right. Wherever God's called them, whatever space they've been called to, they are fully occupying that particular space. When it comes to humility, there's a really fine line between humility and weakness. And sometimes people get the two crossed where they think they're one and the same and they're really not. Weakness language, it demonstrates powerlessness. It also demonstrates a victim mentality. And weak language, victim language, it sounds like this. It says, I can't. I can't. Or it says, I have to, which that means I have no control. I have no control, so I have to. Other words that are used in victim language or weak language is, I'll try. And when you say I'll try, that already means that you have intentions to fail. You're just letting the other person know so that they can mentally prepare that you're about to fail.
Ooh, that's good.
I want to open up to Exodus chapter 3, verse 10, and I want to talk to you a little bit about Moses. Exodus chapter 3, verse 10 is where God is talking directly to Moses. This is really the very early stages of Moses entering into his purpose, starting to walk where God was calling him to walk. And here we get to see the relationship between God and Moses begin to develop. So it says, therefore come now, and I will send you to Pharaoh, and then bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? I want to stop right there. Moses had a really bad stutter, which tells me that because this was his response, and we see a little bit later that he has a little bit of a hesitation. And eventually God assigns him Aaron to help him in speaking, because Moses tells the Lord that he struggles in that area. So God gives him an assistant to be able to translate what he needs to say. In this particular section where I paused, it says, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Moses told the Lord, Lord, I can't. Lord, not me, send someone else. I can't, right? A lot of people will say things like that, and it gives the air of humility, but if we really break it down, it's actually really selfish. God is asking him to do something. God is commanding him to do something. And if Moses said, Lord, not me, I can't, it sounds like humility, but it's him being selfish and refusing to do the will of God. So he is refusing to occupy his God-given space in this world by saying, I can't. Or if he says, God, I'll try. I'll give it my best shot. That's not humility, it's selfishness.
Interesting. You know, I think of, unfortunately, maybe not many, but multiple people that, you know, I've known in the church who, you know, if you asked around and said, like, who's the most humble person at the church, they probably would have been on the list. But now thinking back, they were always the person that, you know, never wanted the spotlight, that, you know, anytime, even if people were telling them, like, you could be really great at this, or you should start this business, or you should head up this ministry, their response was, oh no, me, no, that's okay. I don't have to, like, not me, like, I'm not any good at that. Like, that someone else can, why not him? He's a much better leader than me. And, you know, a lot of people would look at that and be like, oh, wow, how humble. He doesn't need the attention. But in fact, he or she was averting and outright rejecting the call or the assignment that God had for them, and the promotion that God had for them.
And occupying their God-given space.
Incredible.
Yeah. I'm hearing it. And I'm like, oh, that's like, it's gross. Like, they're outrightly refusing.
Yeah.
But trying to come off humble.
Yeah, it's like a false humility.
It's a false humility. That's exactly what it is. And actually, another personal example is these YouTube videos. I don't want to do them. I did not want to do them. For the longest time, I ran from YouTube because I just did not want to.
Yep. You know how long we've had this equipment?
For a very long time.
Long enough where I don't remember how long we've had this equipment.
Yeah, and it was something I really didn't want to do. And, Derek had mentioned it. I know people in the past are like, you should start a podcast. You should start a YouTube channel. And I'm like, no, it's okay. I'm doing my thing. I'm doing what God's called me to do behind the scenes, right? Admin, running the business, running my family, doing what I need to do. And I think we mentioned this in one of the videos that somebody came over and they were just sitting there talking, an introvert like myself, and said, I don't have the luxury of not being seen. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about... As a believer, right. And he was talking about that in terms of being a believer and needing to be with people, needing to serve people. Because to serve people, you have to be seen.
Yeah, needing to be the light.
Yeah, needing to be the light.
Not hiding the light under a basket.
Exactly. I'm not talking about like needing to be seen, like I need to be on stage with a microphone. No, it's needing to be seen by people, allowing people and giving people the opportunity to see the light that's in you.
Yeah,
because,
absolutely.
like you mentioned, we each have a seed that was put inside of us by our maker, and it's a unique seed. No one else has that unique gift. So if I keep that hidden, no, it's okay. I'm doing what God's called me to do behind scenes. Mm-hmm. No one will ever get to see what I have.
Yeah. Shame on us then.
Shame on us.
If we keep it inside.
Exactly. And that would be pure selfishness for me to not do it. So that was a realistic example, and that is why I'm doing this, because I don't want to have false humility.
Yeah.
When you are occupying your God-given space, understand that you're not going to be occupying it alone. If we look at the rest of this chapter, you're going to see this amazing dynamic between Moses and God, that they just go back and forth. Moses will say something, God will respond. God will say something, Moses will respond. And every step of the way, Moses is asking, like, what do I do? How do I do it? And God is literally telling him exactly what's going to happen, play by play by play. So when you occupy your God-given space, when you are humble and you do what God's called you to do, God is going to give you the play-by-play. He's going to give you what you need in order for you to occupy that space. So when we read this and we understand humility from that point of view, humility is total reliance on God, and weakness is total reliance on yourself. So we look at Moses. Moses was humble, but not weak. He was humble in the sense of he was aware of his insecurities. He was aware of where he fell short on certain things, but he continued to occupy his God-given space and relied on God 100%, which made him humble. Humility and weakness have this one commonality, and that is that they need to be fed, they need to be fertilized, and they need to be grown. If you want to grow your humility, you need to practice relying on God. Find opportunities to rely on God. If you want to be weak, find more opportunities to rely on yourself.
That'll preach. All right, well, now that we have that foundation laid nice and thick, let's talk about the purpose, the process, and the promise of humility. Let's start with the purpose. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, we read in verse 2, "And you shall remember that the Lord your God led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble you and test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not." And then again in verse 16, "Who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and that he might test you, to do you good in the end. Then you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gained me this wealth." The purpose of humility is testing. And testing for what? Testing for purity. Us Americans who grew up in public or private education, when we think of testing, we're like, because it's a judgment of our performance, of our intelligence. Mm-hmm. Testing with the Lord is a little bit different. It's like a judgment. And what's being judged is the contents of your heart. Mm-hmm. And his litmus test for how he's judging what's in your heart is found right here in verse 17. "Then you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gained me this wealth." What he's looking to see is, Are you taking credit for all of the good things in your life? Or are you giving him credit for all of those good things? That is the test of humility. And you know what's so interesting is that the Israelites, they were tested in the wilderness. So was Moses. Moses grew his humility. He was the most humble person, but he was brought to the wilderness for 40 years before he was called into his calling to free Israel. And the wilderness is where that humbling process often happens, where our hearts are tested, where we are brought so low that, our good friends Alex and Soul, Dominion Fire Ministries, did a live and talked about how during fasting, you go through a heat process. We talked about this the other day as well. You go through a heating process where things that are inside of you that shouldn't be there are exposed.
Yeah.
That is the purification process of humbling. Which brings us to the process of humility. Psalm 35 in verse 13 says, I humbled myself with fasting. Congratulations. If you are on this fast, you are in the process of humbling yourself. Now, humbling yourself is not only done through fasting. What humbling yourself is the process of bringing yourself lower, bringing your flesh lower. And there is nothing that accelerates the process of bringing your flesh low like fasting.
Yeah.
So fasting is the highest form of the process of humility. And lastly, the promise of humility. In Matthew 23, Jesus says that blessed are the humble, for they shall be exalted. The promise of humility is promotion. I mean, just look at Jesus in the wilderness. He was brought to the wilderness. And you know what's interesting? We talked about testing, that is the purpose of humility. That word testing can also be translated tempting. And Jesus was brought into the wilderness to be tempted.
Wow.
So that on the other side of the wilderness, he could be promoted. And so he went into the wilderness with the Holy Ghost, but he came out with the Holy Ghost and with power.
Wow.
His promotion was the power that he then carried to have word of him go throughout all the land.
What did the devil tempt Jesus with when he was in the desert for 40 days?
He tempted him with food. He tempted him to tempt God. And then he tempted him with worldly power.
All three of those things are rooted in selfishness. If Jesus was selfish, it would have stripped him of his humility.
I think what also fits in that same vein and is worth studying is those three temptations are the exact opposite of the three things he said that you will do in his sermon. He said, you will fast, but he refused to take the bread. He said, you will pray, but he refused to tempt God. And he said, you will give, but he refused to receive riches from the devil. So it was almost like those three things, that's worth a study.
That is worth a study.
That's really interesting. I've never thought about that until right now.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So the promise of humility is promotion. If we read on in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 18, and you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. What this is saying is it is required for you to be able to have power to get wealth in order for him to establish his covenant. So whether or not, because all of those, I would say, fake humble people or that who have that false humility, were, I think the one commonality that they all had was none of them wanted to be rich. They all thought it was like, oh, no, vow of poverty over here.
Wow.
Can't have too much money.
Wow.
Because too much money would be an ego thing. But God is literally saying in his word that in order to establish my covenant with you, which I swore to your fathers, I have to give you power to get wealth. But I'm humbling you first so I can test your hearts and make sure through that process that I know that you will give me credit and not take it for yourselves. That's the purpose, the process, and the promise of humility.
So congratulations, you are 1 week into the humbling process. During this time, I encourage you to ask the Lord to expose and remove any impurities that may be in your heart. Ask him to help you humble yourself so that you could receive the promotion that he has for you and you could occupy your God-given space.
God bless you.
Happy fasting.